On Sky News Australia, this is the Rita Panahi Show Overtime.
Welcome to the Rita Panahi Show Overtime. Coming up today, the latest news from the King's cancer diagnosis to the controversial US Senate border deal to the best and worst bits of the Grammys. And yes, there will be a bumper edition of Lefties Losing It. We'll have it all for you. Joining me today is writer and commentator Connor Tomlinson, the great and courageous Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the Stanford Medical School professor who tried to warn the world about the lunacy of imposing lockdowns and mandates to deal with the respiratory virus. And with the latest on the royal news, including King Charles's cancer diagnosis, will be Kinsey Schofield. But first, let's go to the big news stories of the day with the Australian newspapers' Sophie Ellsworth. Sophie, let's start in Melbourne. We saw Victoria Police attacking protesters marching against the state's pandemic tyranny. Now, 3 years later, Victoria Police were abused by protesters while marching for gay pride. Vic Police Command has done everything in its power to wokeify the police force, but the far left still hate them, Sophie.
Yeah, Rita, this was really interesting from the festival on the weekend. I'm sorry, but this has just become a giant mess for the police force. It's a very bad look for all of those involved. No one accepts violence is okay, but this was meant to be a peaceful event. And sometimes the police tactics have worked against them, as we saw in COVID, and people are really angry at the police. And this was shown on Sunday with what unfolded.
But I don't think these people were reacting this way because of the police's crackdown on anti-lockdown protesters, because I would guess these people would be the first to be dobbing in their neighbours, to be wearing masks outdoors. I think they would have been COVID lockdown enthusiasts if I were to take an educated guess. Some of them are still wearing masks now in 2024. Look at them. But they're just anti-police. They're far left. They're Marxists. They don't want the police in their ranks, even if they're marching for gay pride. And Victoria Police needs to understand that trying to appease people who hate you is not going to always work out. Now, staying in Victoria, let's look at this survey. This is been published in the Herald Sun today, showing that Victorian ratepayers are calling on local councils to ditch their woke agendas and get back to basics. Statewide surveys run by Council Watch have revealed residents were tired of councillors with political aspirations and executives who pandered to minorities instead of focusing on rubbish and roads. More than 80% of people rated their council's performance as terrible or poor. Now, this is the key part of the survey results, if you ask me. Ratepayers were asked to rank what their top priorities were for local government, what they should be focused on. And the top areas were maintaining and upgrading roads, footpaths and parks, and removing dumped rubbish. Guess what was at the bottom of the list, Sophie? Climate change plans, equality, diversity, Indigenous reconciliation, and LGBTQIA plus issues. So it seems the very things that the councils seem to be preoccupied with, the ratepayers list at the very bottom of the topics they want them to focus on.
Rita, isn't it interesting? Because every time you get your rates quarterly, you look at it, whether the rates are going up, and you're like, what is my council doing for me? These councils have become too ideologically focused. They're pandering to minorities. They should be focusing, as the survey showed, on rubbish and parking issues and road issues, rather than focusing on, having enough flags above the city, above the council chambers or these sorts of issues. It's just become too problematic for councils. They need to get back to basics.
Oh, absolutely. Now, let's go to some international news. Javier Milei, Argentina's president, is on his way to Israel. He's going to be meeting with Israeli President Isaac Herzog and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sophie, he will also visit a kibbutz that was attacked on October 7 by Hamas. He is very much pro-Israel. He studies the Torah. There's even talk that he might one day convert and become a rabbi.
this is interesting, Rita, that he's going to these lengths now to go and visit Israel. I think obviously a lot of people will be very supportive of this, but it'll also come with some condemnation of why is he siding with Israel. But I think it will largely be welcome that he is going to visit there and to see the atrocities that did take place on October 7.
Well, I can tell you none of his supporters will be shocked by this. 3 days before the election in Argentina, when there were pro-Palestinian marches across the world and anti-Israeli marches, we should call them, he was waving the Israeli flag. He found the biggest Israeli flag possibly in Argentina, and he was waving it. So his supporters know exactly where he stands on those issues. Now let's go to the border crisis at the US southern border, with record numbers streaming in illegally under the Biden administration. Well, we finally have a Senate border deal, which will be voted on this week. This was struck between the Republican Senate leaders and the Biden White House. This controversial bill looks set to fail, Sophie. Fox News is reporting it's facing significant opposition from Republicans and other conservatives who say it does not do enough to tackle the border crisis and stop releases into the interior. I've got to say that's an understatement. The bill is a disaster, and it really shows why so many GOP politicians are, well, they're on a different planet to their voters. They don't seem to really understand what their voters care about.
Rita, this is going to be a very important issue, particularly leading up to the presidential election. We know Donald Trump's very strong on this issue, and it has been a problem under the Biden administration. But there are problems with this bill, hence the fallout that we've seen unfold.
Yep, it is the number one issue, which is extraordinary when we look at the cost of living crisis in America, that this is the number one issue. Now, Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's Republican rival, she's teamed up with Saturday Night Live to poke fun at the former president, posing as a South Carolina voter during this typically unfunny sketch.
My question is, why won't you debate Nikki Haley?
Oh, my God, it's her, the woman who was in charge of security on January 6th. It's Nancy Pelosi.
For the 100th time, that is not Nancy Pelosi. It is Nikki Haley.
Are you doing okay, Donald? You might need a mental competency test.
Oh, gosh, it's just not funny. But Saturday Night Live, there is news there, could be saved by Shane Gillis, the hilarious comic who was sacked from the show back in 2019 for some controversial remarks he made that were unearthed. I mean, a comedian saying something offensive, I'm shocked. But he's gone on to have enormous success since being cancelled by Saturday Night Live, and they now want him back. Let's have a look at some of Shane's work from his recent Netflix special. Here is his take on Joe Biden and Donald Trump and the debates.
Because Trump's whole thing is he tries to get in the other guy's head, dude. You can't get in Joe's head. Joe's not in there. Good luck, dude. Biden is Trump's kryptonite in a debate. He's literally perfect. You can't beat him. Because Trump tries to drag the other guy into like a talking contest where he will win. He will win at that. He can't get Biden. He tries. Every debate he's trying so hard, and Biden's just... That's it, though. He tries. He just, you're a loser. Your son did crack. And Biden's just, what?
So his Trump is better than Trump. I mean, if you're listening, not watching, his Trump is more convincing than Trump. And I've got to say, this is my favourite part of the special, where he recounts that night where American forces killed the Islamic State leader.
It's the night the United States killed the leader of ISIS. Trump comes out of the Situation Room at like midnight in the White House, and he walks down that tunnel like and gives a press conference, like he's giving a post-game NBA just killed a guy press conference. He walks up in front of the entire world at midnight and just goes, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He died like a dog. And that's all him, dude. I'm gonna change one word of that. That's what he opened with. And then he did 40 minutes. The speech is 40 minutes for no reason. It wasn't a prepared speech. He freestyled 40 straight. Not even a speech, just mean talk for 40. The meanest talk you've ever heard in front of the whole world. Abu. We could hear him crying. I said, Abu, don't cry. Abu. Let me tell you something. Abu cried. He cried quite a bit. I wouldn't have cried. Crybaby Baghdadi, that's what we were all calling it.
It's just so good. He's just so good. It's interesting, though, because he's just now teamed up with Bud Light. Now, Bud Light seems to be trying to team up with the most unpolitically correct characters they can find. They've teamed up with the UFC, which is absolutely hated by the left. This is interesting. This is shows that there is life after cancellation.
Well, isn't it interesting, Rita, because it's in stark contrast to Bud Light teaming up with Dylan Mulvaney, and we saw the fallout from that, which was catastrophic for the company. They've gone the absolute other way.
Well, they've had to.
And they've had to, because this has affected their bottom line. So I think this will be a good result for them, but this is a lesson too. When they go down that woke road, it bites them hard.
It has, and nothing worked. They did try to do a bunch of pro-America ads. They even had Taylor Swift's boyfriend, before he was her boyfriend, do an ad. They were all bombed. Everyone said they were lame. They weren't going to buy the product. So they have had to go and find the most unwoke comedians or sporting organisations to team up with to try to get people back. Sophie Ellsworth, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Rita.
Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start Lefties by checking in on trans activist and product ambassador Dylan Mulvaney.
I'm just looking at my clock. I think it's been a little longer than 15 minutes, darling. And seeing that I'm slating things out 2 to 3 years from now that will come out in 2 to 3 years, I think it might be a little bit longer. The longest 15 minutes of your life. Love you.
Okay, let's just move along at a rapid pace. Let's go to the BBC's Newsnight program and this powerful performance described as a feminist manifesto. Surely that's it. Please, no more. Please? That's the BBC, ladies and gentlemen, your taxes at work, Britain. Now let's see if slavery-obsessed America knows anything about which countries banned slavery first.
Black History Month is important to you?
Yeah, for obvious reasons.
Who were the first 3 countries to ban slavery?
Girl, I don't know. First 3 countries? Ban slavery. Definitely wasn't America. Brazil? I don't know.
Asia. Asia is a continent.
Guess what? America was among the first 3. You'd think Americans would know that. But though the college kids are very much indoctrinated about systemic racism, they don't seem to know too many facts, including some very basic mathematics.
What is 15 times 4?
15 times 4.
Gosh.
20, 30, 23.
20.
4.
48. It's 48.
I would say 48 with her.
I would say 48.
Why did I say 48?
48. I mean, I sincerely hope that was a setup, but I fear it was not. Dear me. Now to this confused gal who thinks that men who are attracted to her are gay because she identifies as non-binary.
I'm non-binary, so if you're a girl and you think I'm hot, you're gay. If you're a guy and you think I'm hot, you're gay. If you're non-binary and you think I'm hot, I've probably slept with one of your exes. I'm sorry.
If I'm a girl and I think you're an idiot, what does that make me? Does that make me gay or straight? I don't know. The education system has failed that poor girl. Possibly her parents have failed her as well. Now, before I go, let's check in with a comic poking fun at Lefties losing it. Here is Jake Tossell mocking the noble profession of journalism, woke journalism.
I woke up, checked my privilege, and then had breakfast where I found my journalism degree. Then I wrote articles why the suburb Manly's name is problematic and how cricket whites reinforce colonialism and white supremacy. For lunch, I had corn from a farmer's market and a hit of my vape. I then went to the park for a smoking ceremony. I spent the rest of my day on Twitter and Facebook abusing baby boomers with different opinions to me. Lastly, I called my capitalist pig dad to see if the beach house is free. I'm due for a sick day.
So much material for comics who dare to go there. Joining me now is writer and presenter Connor Tomlinson. Connor, let's start with this piece by Tom Slater in Spiked Online. He wrote about the lack of outcry against Islamist extremism in the UK. Tory MP Mike Freer last week announced he won't contest re-election after receiving death threats and an arson attack on his office over his pro-Israel views. And one can understand his fear after Tory MP Sir David Amos was stabbed to death in his constituency by radical Islamists back in 2021. Yet the reaction from authorities, even his colleagues, seems to be one of acceptance. Everyone has moved on. Why isn't there greater outrage that a politician is stepping down because of fear of Islamist attack?
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Rita. There is a staggering level of complacency and cowardice at work in British politics. We've seen this for the last 50 years with the grooming gang scandal that has rocked English towns and cities like Oxford, Rochdale, Telford, Rotherham. Thousands of girls have been raped because they were white British girls, and the establishment was very uncomfortable to publish the details about their reports because overwhelmingly the perpetrators were mainly Pakistani Muslims, despite making up 8% of the population, even less so because they broadened it out to be Asian. They were about 28% of perpetrators. And this translates over to this situation, even with Mike Freer himself. So Mike Freer is a representative of Finchley and Golders Green, a constituency that has a high level of Jews living in the area. And since October the 7th, he has been unabashedly pro-Israeli. He's also a gay man with a husband. And so the adjacent Muslim constituents in his and other boroughs didn't take too kindly to that. But when he's been doing interviews in the last week for British TV stations like GB News and Talk TV, when asked, "Are you afraid of Islamist terrorism?" he's downplayed it. He said, multiculturalism hasn't failed. He said, I don't want to tar a whole community. And even speaking on Sir David Amos's killer, Abi Harbi Ali, who stabbed Sir David Amos to death in a constituency surgery in 2021, he said, I'm not really sure what motivated him. Now, he is blaming social media radicalization for this and completely overlooking Islamist terrorism after his own colleague was killed and his office is firebombed. Genuinely, these politicians are beyond saving from their own cowardice.
This is just so disturbing. Douglas Murray spoke about this on my program on Friday, and he just can't believe the mindset of so many of the Tories. These are supposed to be Tories. Where are their conservative credentials here? What has happened to them? And Douglas Murray himself has been met with threats, even had to move a speech yesterday after the Apollo Theatre got spooked and gave into the angry mob. The speech did go ahead to a capacity crowd at another venue, but that didn't stop the protesters turning up to the wrong theatre and screaming this sort of abuse.
Hell,
no one's going to accuse them of being terribly intelligent, but they do wield power, Connor, because they scare ordinary people from speaking. Douglas Murray, yourself, you've got the courage to say how it is, but so many people, it seems, are self-censoring in Great Britain.
Well, Douglas has had unwavering moral clarity on this issue, and he's right. We should be deporting any terrorist sympathiser with a foreign extraction or imprisoning anyone who agitates on our streets every weekend in my home city, London, on behalf of a terror state. We should not be allowing those people who declare their intent ahead of time to launch intifada or jihad and subsume England in some sort of global Islamic caliphate. But the problem is our political leaders are utterly spineless. Or they have this delusional belief that somehow if we just suppress expressions of native culture and censor enough complaints of the British people who repeatedly in the last decade in every election have said we wanted lower mass migration because we feel culturally displaced, if we just silence them enough, then we'll be able to appease even the most radical jihadian because we'll just, I don't know, generate enough prosperity that they like to live in the West and they'll just set their religion aside, I suppose. But this is a delusional belief because these people don't buy into Britain. They extract resources from Britain, but they don't consider themselves our neighbours. And so the moment that they have the ability to hold the whip hand of power by marching through the street and declaring their intent to subvert our civilization, they're going to. And the police are totally cowardly. One very quick mention. When the cenotaph was being protested ahead of Armistice Day, 2 veterans were recorded talking to police officers. And the police officers said, you need to stop putting your Union Jacks against the bollard because we've been told you have to stand behind the bollard. And they said, well, you're not telling them to stop flying their flags, are you? And one of the police officers said to them, there are more of them than there are of us. If that's not telling about the cowardice of our institutions, I don't know what is.
It's submitting to mob rule. This is what happens in lawless societies. It shouldn't be happening in the West, in a first world nation. It really is just a deplorable state of events. And you see this with the following story. We've got a manhunt underway for Abdul Azidi over the January 31 acid attack, which has hospitalised a mother and 2 children. This man had no business, Connor, being in the UK. But listen to the Education Secretary being asked about this, Gillian Keegan. Her response here is just illuminating and frankly disturbing.
How is it possible that someone turned down twice for asylum, who then commits a sexual offence, or more than one sexual offence, is granted refugee status by a tribunal? How is that possible?
Well, I think that's something that more than one person are asking, as you say, and I think my understanding is the Home Secretary has asked for all the details. But this is not really about asylum. This is about, obviously, the attack on, a mother and her children, which was horrific.
It's not really about asylum. Connor, how utterly delusional are the Tories and the commentariat in the UK? Because I've heard this line from plenty of political pundits who want to say, well, this is all just about toxic masculinity and male violence, and we really shouldn't focus on the asylum process.
Oh, yes. There was Caroline Noakes MP, who heads up the Women and Equalities Committee, along with a Labour MP called Ribeiro Addy on BBC Newsnight, who went on and said that we shouldn't be talking about his asylum claim, and instead we should be talking about misogyny and microaggressions, the most luxury belief possible, to use an acid attack on a woman and her toddlers to complain about mean words that MPs get over social media. There's also some barrister on GB News that blamed Andrew Tate and toxic masculinity for radicalising this obvious sex offender Islamist who has committed this crime. I somehow don't think TikTok is to blame here. But Keegan, she's not the brightest of politicians, but you can tell by the look on her face that she doesn't quite believe what she's saying, that she feels compelled to say it because she's trying to defend her government's record on immigration, letting through between 50,000 a year illegal boat crossings, plus record net migration of over 750,000 every year under a Conservative government, ahead of the worst electoral loss in 100 years. And they have to keep trotting out this line. Number one, because they already want to clamp down on dissent. This is the online harms bill in the UK. So they're trying to use this as the pretext to police social media. But number two, because they can't quite excuse the fact that the Home Office allowed this man to slip through the net and grant him asylum after 2 failed claims and a sex offence on the ground of his miraculous conversion to Christianity. Because this has happened multiple times now. There was a Liverpool taxi cab bomber that did the same thing. And even though there is absolutely no record, by the way, from the local Catholic Church or the Church of England of this man being given a reference by a priest or having converted, and his local halal butcher who said he's a friend, said he's a good Muslim who wanted to fly back to Afghanistan, despite claiming on his application it was a threat to his life, to meet a wife. They know the entire asylum system is absurd and indefensible. So they have to deflect the issue from their own broken record.
Well, they're gaming the system, and if you make it easy to game the system, you shouldn't be surprised if it's happening. I did love this take from Konstantin Kisin. He said, if politicians put half the energy they've devoted to suiciding our economy through the ritual sacrifice they call net zero into securing the border and removing foreign criminals, we might not be the acid attack capital of the world. Well said there. And on that, The Telegraph is reporting that London Mayor Sadiq Khan is investing £150 million in a secret project to enhance road user charging technology. This started back in 2021 and it's run by Transport for London. It's called Project Detroit. It aims to integrate all the existing green motorist taxes. We've got the ultra low emission zone, we've got the low emission zone charges. They want to put it all into one single platform. And the fear here is, Connor, that this is going to lead the way to a pay per mile road tax in the future. Khan denies that's what the intention here, but no one's going to be shocked if that's precisely what happens.
Well, no, Sadiq Khan is a routine liar. I think that's fair to say at this point, considering the study that he paid Imperial College London over £800,000 in public money to commission in order to justify the expansion of the ULEZ scheme. He said that the findings said that air pollution was costing 4,000 lives every year of Londoners. Actually, it was just calculated as life years. So that meant that a couple of days off of your life, if you were in London in the worst polluted parts every single day, may or may not be knocked off. So he knows he's lying about that. And you'd thought he'd have higher priorities. I mean, TfL was about $6 billion in the hole, considering the amount of payments they've had since 2020. There are 43 knife crime incidents a day in this city since he stopped stop and search because he called it institutionally racist. The Met Police are saying that drill gangs are having their total run of the city. Shootings are up X amount of %, and they're now admitting rap lyrics in trials. The majority of the kids, the homicides, 90 homicides last year, were from young kids. Excuse me if I don't care more about the fact that kids are dying than the hurty words. And this isn't the only place he's installing cameras as well. I mean, he's already run a pilot scheme for this, according to City Hall insiders. So he's definitely going to do it. A source within the Met Police has told me in the last couple of weeks that they have been taking bus shelters off the streets to implement cameras and audio recording devices to try and stop muggings. Now, something would tell me that maybe if you stop the mass migration and telling every kid that's born here, if they're black or minority ethnic, that they're institutionally racist and they should go out and wreak revenge on society, if you stop that, you might have fewer stabbings and machete attacks. They're not exactly British pastime, but instead he's just going to keep monitoring the entire city.
Connor Tomlinson, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Joining me now is Professor of Medicine at Stanford University, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Doctor, as COVID-19 inquiries unfold, a convenient trend is emerging. Public health officials and politicians are desperately trying to distance themselves from the very policies they backed and the enormous damage those policies caused. Professor Devi Sridhar, a zero COVID advocate and advisor to then Scottish PM Nicola Sturgeon, has told a COVID inquiry she had always supported maximum suppression, not total elimination. With the enormous harms caused by many countries' COVID response only becoming apparent now, I guess, Doctor, it's no surprise that we've got so many experts trying to rewrite history. But Has there been sufficient accountability in public health? Are we in danger of repeating the same grave mistakes when the next pandemic hits?
Rita, we have not had sufficient accountability in public health. In fact, what has happened is quite the opposite. We have had public health officials who made tremendous mistakes during the pandemic, if you want to call them that, essentially be promoted up the chain. Tony Fauci himself got a professorship at Georgetown University, I think. The public health architects of the lockdown have essentially locked in place that plan. So when there's another pandemic, we absolutely will repeat the same response. There has been no acknowledgement, no public acknowledgement by public health about the extent of its mistakes or the processes, specifically about demonizing people who criticize public health. That specific mistake, which might have helped reverse the lockdowns in real time, that public health is embraced in spades.
Well, that's disturbing if we've learnt little and there's been no accountability. And we did have during the pandemic this climate of fear and censorship where rational expert voices like yourself were suppressed, and anyone who questioned the wisdom of lockdowns and school closures and mandates, well, they were smeared in the media, and so many were silenced or censored on social media. Are things different now that at least we've got one social media platform, X, formerly Twitter, that appears to have a commitment to free speech? You've met with Elon Musk personally. Do you think under pressure from governments and public health experts, he would hold the line and allow dissenting views on X?
I mean, I think we have seen the power of having at least one platform committed to the idea of free speech. I mean, I wouldn't say X is perfect, but it's so much better than it was before Elon took it over. And if you compare it to some of the other platforms, like Facebook or other platforms, it's still YouTube. It's still very difficult to have an honest conversation about difficult scientific matters because you're going to get suppressed. And I think it is, I mean, it just highlights how important free speech, having the capacity to have free speech can be. What's happened actually, Rita, is that it's not just that these platforms organically decided to censor people who disagreed with public health policy or with government policy. It was the government itself ordering social media companies to censor people like me, or else they would face retribution in the form of regulatory action. There's a court case I've been involved with called the Missouri versus Biden court case that's going to get a hearing in the U.S. Supreme Court in March of 2024. So I think March 18, 2024, where we documented it's the government that ordered the censorship. And the political authorities that ordered it, they still have not faced a comeuppance, Rita. You have the Biden administration still in power. You have the Canadian government. Even the Australian government, I'm afraid to say, was involved in this social media censorship efforts. And, I think this is one of these issues where people of all good faith should come together, because I don't see any real constituency for censorship except for the elites in power who hate being criticized.
And like you said, they haven't been held accountable for any of that. Hopefully more comes to light during this court hearing. I do wonder, though, how different would the pandemic response have been if there was genuine free speech on at least social media and leading experts like yourself weren't suppressed? Do you think that would have changed things? I know this is a hypothetical, but if you and other infectious disease experts who right from the start said this lockdown approach copied from the Chinese Communist Party is not the way to deal with the respiratory virus, is not to deal with something that is disproportionately impacting the elderly and the infirm. Do you think people would have reacted differently and governments would have been forced to react differently?
I mean, first, Rita, I should thank you for having me on, even in times when it was very difficult for me to get my message out. There were very few media outlets that were willing to do that. But that itself is the problem, like that there were so few media outlets willing to do that. And just to answer your question directly, we absolutely would have won the argument. the idea of a lockdown itself had never been tried at the kind of scale it was tried during the pandemic. It was a huge experiment. And if we'd had an honest media, if we'd had no censorship during the hoariest days of 2020, we would have won the argument. We had the better of scientific argument at the time. And I think so much of the damage that we've seen to children, to the poor, to the working class as a result of the lockdowns could have been and would have been avoided.
And we were told this live that the medical profession were all in agreement. It was just a few outliers who questioned the wisdom of this strategy. The Swedish government, though, however, was the outlier. They stuck to their existing advanced pandemic response plans. They did not shut down society. They did not shut down businesses and schools. And yet you look at their total excess deaths, it was smaller in Sweden than in other European countries during the 3 pandemic years, 2020 through to 2022. And the rate was less than half of that of the United States. That's according to a study by the Cato Institute. Do we have a full picture now of the cost of the pandemic response, the health costs, not just the economic costs, or is there worse data yet to come?
Well, I think the tail of harms of the lockdown is long. We're starting to see, for instance, the toll it took on children, on the mental health of children, on learning of children. And I just saw a report in the Telegraph saying that the harms that children face from that school disruptions, well, it's going to last into the next generation. They're going to be living worse health. Yeah. They're going to be poorer as a consequence of the decisions we made to harm them during the period from 2020 to 2023. Actually, on Sweden is such an important counterexample. They didn't have a broad social lockdown. They had something much closer to a normal way that you manage respiratory virus pandemics, something that's more consistent with freedom. They made sure they made some mistakes early on, but they made sure a broad scope to try to protect vulnerable people as best they could, while allowing the rest of society go on, because that society going on is actually good for the health of society. And if you look from the beginning of the pandemic to right now, and you compare, for instance, the Australian all-cause excess deaths versus Swedish all-cause excess deaths, Sweden has lower all-cause excess deaths than Australia since the start of the pandemic.
Incredible.
The key thing here, I think, is it's that you didn't need this lockdown-focused strategy in order to protect human life. Even and in fact, it was better not to have that lockdown-focused strategy if you want to protect human life. Australia is kind of a example case of how, like, the best case to have a lockdown. You could actually in 2020 get close to zero by locking down because the disease arrived during your summer COVID low season. And you could close down a couple of major international airports and reduce the total number of cases basically to zero for 2020. But even with that success, the long-term effect was worse health for Australians than for the Swedish without the lockdowns. But they didn't have any of those advantages. It's really striking.
And just on that Telegraph piece you mentioned, they also report that the lockdowns will wipe $700 billion off the global economy and stunt the growth for decades because of the lasting impact of school closures on young people. And that's according to the OECD. And you warned, again, right from the start, that those who'd be most severely impacted by lockdowns would be the poor, particularly poor children. And again, we are seeing the devastating impact of that. Just lastly, Doctor, we saw in Australia the overwhelming majority, sadly, submit almost happily to these draconian measures. We even had in Melbourne curfews. Do you think once the next pandemic hits, and we will have another pandemic, we will have that same phenomenon where people will give away their rights and freedoms for the perception of safety?
Sadly, Rita, I think the answer is yes to that question. And I think it's partly because the techniques used to control populations by essentially scaring the living daylights out of them have proved to be very, very effective. unless we can build within the population a counter movement so that we can have sitting at the table when public health is making decisions, people who are much more ethical than the people who made the decision in public health. So when someone says, let's use propaganda to scare people, someone at the table says, no, that's unethical. We can't do that. I remember seeing a ad that was aired in Australia of a young woman sitting in an ICU, unable to breathe. I'm sure you remember this ad. And it was, this attractive young woman looking like she's about to die from COVID. The message was even young people have a risk of dying from this disease, when in fact the information, the scientific information coming out at the time was that young people face much lower risk from this disease than it faced from the harms of the lockdowns that were imposed on them. So you had this propaganda campaign within Australia to try to convince people that it was irresponsible not to lock down. It was irresponsible to fight back. Those kinds of propaganda techniques are very effective. And Rita, I'm afraid they will absolutely be used again because they were proved so effective this time, unless we take a political response that says that those such things are out of bounds.
Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for your courage throughout this pandemic. You were one of the few voices with the courage to put your reputation on the line, and you've been absolutely vindicated. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Joining me now is royal commentator and the host of the To Die For Daily podcast, Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, straight to the most pressing news of the day. Buckingham Palace has announced King Charles has been diagnosed with a form of cancer. A statement from the palace said His Majesty has chosen to share his diagnosis to prevent speculation and in the hope it may assist public understanding for all those around the world who are affected by cancer. Kinsey, it's understood Prince Harry has already spoken to his father and will travel to the UK in the coming days.
Yes, we believe he's on his way right now, solo. And the reason why I'm slightly surprised that he's not bringing Meghan and the children is because we, despite my beautiful backdrop, are having horrible weather right now, flooding and rain that Los Angeles and Santa Barbara have not seen before. So it's a little surprising to me that while we're getting these emergency alerts on our phones telling us not to leave our house unless we're trying to escape something, Harry is picking up and heading across the pond to be with his father. Rita, it tells me that this might be, a very serious situation. And obviously that's upsetting.
Well, we saw throughout the Queen's health battles, there really wasn't a change of behaviour from Harry and Meghan, and there wasn't a effort to reconcile their differences with the family. And we are early days, I know, but we are seeing a different approach. I do hope, though, that the King's health battle does not become fodder for Harry and Meghan's latest reality series. The Duke and Duchess are reportedly working on a number of new projects under their $100 million 5-year deal with Netflix. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was discovered in a meeting, an internal meeting that Netflix had, and an executive said that Harry and Meghan have one scripted movie on the horizon, as well as 2 unscripted projects. We believe those to be Meet Me at the Lake, which was it's going to be an adaptation from a book that Netflix purchased the rights to for Harry and Meghan to produce under Archwell. And the original reports were that Harry and Meghan purchased those very expensive rights. And according to Page 6, that's not the case. It's Netflix that pulled out the checkbook. And I think that they did that because they want to make sure it gets done. And if you look at their contract, it expires in 2025. It took them 2 years to produce and multiple production teams to produce the only commercial success they've had, which is Harry and Meghan, and which is literally just them tearing into their family for several hours. So maybe Netflix purchased those rights because they're going to make sure it's made, whether Harry and Meghan are still there on 2025 when that contract comes up or not. Then we also believe that the other project could potentially be Prince Harry's rumored Africa documentary. And as you and I discussed the last time we spoke, some very serious allegations coming out from Prince Harry's African Parks charity. So is he really in a position to produce a glossy documentary about Africa when he has yet to speak out on some of the atrocities being reported coming from a charity that he's in leadership of?
You would think Netflix would be steering well clear of that until there's a resolution to that controversy. Prince Harry, though, has become the punchline of a Saturday Night Live joke. Let's have a look.
NBC has announced plans for a spin-off to the hit series Suits, which will be set in Los Angeles. It will focus on Meghan Markle's character's struggle to balance her legal career while also caring for an unemployed immigrant.
Kinsey, that is so rare. Not that they poke fun at Harry, but that a joke on Saturday Night Live was actually funny, more mildly amusing at least. How do you think he'll handle that sort of mockery?
Well, Rita, I think you and I need to put together the lists of the best Saturday Night Live takedowns because, you know, as you kind of alluded to, Saturday Night Live is a very liberal project these days. They love to poke fun at conservatives. It's very rare that they actually poke fun at Democrats or people that lean in a certain way. And it's actually Martin Short and Steve Martin that kicked the door open on Saturday Night Live in December of 2022, making fun of Harry and Meghan for the very first time. And that kind of opened up the floodgates. SNL does not hesitate to make fun of Harry and Meghan. It is a regular occurrence. And I thought this was just a great, funny joke. But I do think that SNL has it out for Harry and Meghan. And it was reported when Meghan was about to launch her podcast that she was trying to actually host SNL. And it was also reported when Spare came out that Prince Harry was trying to have a little cameo on there. So it makes you wonder if they've changed their mind since they've seen so much criticism from the SNL cast about participating on that show.
Well, Kim Kardashian hosted Saturday Night Live, and I'm sure they've poked fun at her over the years. So maybe it's a strategy just to bring them on side. If they're going to keep mocking you, maybe if you turn up there, they'll go easy. Now, let's talk about the Grammys. They were on yesterday, and there is all sorts of Taylor Swift controversy, as there always is. We'll get to that shortly. But let's start with what was the clear highlight of the event. Here's an example of American excellence, a duet that will be remembered for many years to come. The OG, Tracy Chapman, singing her iconic track Fast Car with country singer Luke Combs, whose version was also a massive hit just last year. Let's have a look. It was a beautiful moment, wasn't it, Kinsey?
Oh, I have goosebumps just watching it again. I don't know why they don't make award shows and Super Bowl halftime shows more like that, you know, like, you know, some old with the new. It's like exactly what you said. That made me proud of American music and of our entertainment industry, and not everything that these award shows do. So that was absolutely the best moment from the Grammys.
Now, there was a controversy. Pop icon Annie Lennox, during a tribute performance for Sinead O'Connor, called for a ceasefire.
Artists for ceasefire, peace in the world.
Now, that gesture was met with this response from anti-Semitism campaigner Noah Tishby. Let's hear from Noah.
Hi, everybody. So tonight, the Grammys were hijacked in favor of Hamas agenda as singer Annie Lennox called for a ceasefire, denying Israel's right to defend itself and also not calling for the release of the hostages. So basically giving Hamas exactly what they wanted.
Kinsey, we've grown used to activism at award shows, even after Ricky Gervais told these celebs to stay in their lane. How was that bit of activism received on the night? I would imagine it would have been received well in the room.
I think it was accepted in the room. It did sort of dampen the festivities, but it was sort of a somber moment anyway. When you guys sent me that clip, Rita, I thought if Annie Lennox is going to try to have this moment, the least she can do is not sound like she's having a bowel movement in the middle. I mean, the vocals weren't even great. The vocals weren't even good. I was horrified for her. So it was just such a downer moment. And you're exactly right. People tune out because of these award shows. They want an escape. They want glamour. They want glitz, and they want a party. And to tune in and to be preached to and to be lectured by people that have enough money to really make a difference themselves, it's pretty, I think it turns people off. I think that's why people tune out.
Oh, the last thing you want is to be lectured to by a pop star or an actor or someone whose life experience is limited, to say the least. Finally, on the Grammys, Taylor Swift won the coveted Album of the Year, but TMZ reports T Swift has been called out online over an awkward interaction after appearing to ignore Celine Dion, who presented the award on stage. Surely not, Kinsey. I mean, how can anybody ignore Celine?
It unfortunately does not look great. You know, we were all so excited to see Celine, who announced in 2022 that she was taking a step back because she has stiff person syndrome. And it is rare and exciting to see her, especially in her element. The only way I can take up for Taylor is to say there's a countdown clock and you have X amount of time to say everything you want to say and do everything you want to do. So maybe there's a sense of anxiety there that you've got to hurry. But how do you not embrace and celebrate one of the best women when it comes to vocal performance in the industry, and someone we see so rarely these days? There is a great picture of them hugging backstage, though, but it wasn't a great look.
Oh, dear me. Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And that's it from me. I'll see you next week for another edition of Overtime. And don't forget, Fridays, 7 p.m, the Rita Panahi Show. And as always, Outsiders on a Sunday morning.